So theoretically, GameStop and Ryan Cohen could know how many shares were in circulation if they so chose to, because obviously there's been a lot of talk about Ryan Cohen and GameStop, and has there been an overvote? Have more shares voted than exist? Do they know how many? And there's been an awful lot of speculation about what they know specifically. So that's interesting that they could find out, but that doesn't actually mean that they are aware of what's going on, because they would have to actively seek it out.
Right. So someone asked me, someone was tweeting to me, didn't you say that they would tell us? And I didn't say that they would. I said that they could and they should, but not that they would. Right. So what decision, how they make the decision to ignore the fact that they have a multitude of complaints coming out of Europe and the UK, especially, a multitude of complaints coming out that I own shares and I'm not getting proxies. I'm not able to vote my shares. All of those complaints coming out, and to just say, oh, it's okay, we're accepting the vote. But this is what Overstock did in 2006. They knew that there were more shares in circulation than they issued. They knew that, in fact, the CEO's own family, who held shares at a brokerage, right, had shares in Overstock, did not get proxy materials, were unable to vote their shares. They knew that, and yet they accepted the vote. Why? Because they got the result that they wanted. So companies tend not to complain about the outcome of the vote unless it's an outcome they didn't want, right? They weren't happy with. Every vote is important, and that vote is the moment when the investors and the company can know that something's wrong. If you didn't get your proxy, you didn't get to vote your shares, something's wrong. In the U.S., we have favorable tax treatment for dividends. So kind of like the two things that shareholders get, the bondholders don't, right? One is a dividend, which is a share of profit from the company, and the other is the right to vote. In the U.S., we have favorable tax treatment for individual investors who receive dividends. So the IRS sends you this form called a 1099. And if your 1099 says that you have non-qualified dividends and all you had was GameStop, or they don't pay a dividend, but say some other stock, that means that your shares have been lent out, right? So that's another tip-off. But the big one for the company has to be the annual meeting. If there are problems with the vote coming in, and I've always referred people to Carl Hagberg. He has a team that work as inspectors of elections, and they can go in and help you figure out where were your real shares, where were your overvotes, who didn't get their, why are certain investors not getting their voting materials. The fact that, and I guess from what I heard, GameStop accepted their vote and went on their merry way. I don't know why they did that. If I were in that seat, right, that CEO seat, and I knew that my investors, people who believed in my company and bought shares of that company to hold, were unable to vote their shares, I'd want to find out why before I accepted the results of the vote.
Why is it in GameStop's best interest to do that, in your opinion? Like, if they've got the result they want, why would they, go messing with it, basically?
So your investors are also employees, are also members of the community. Sometimes they're your customers. The GameStop, that was the thing, right? They're gamers. They're buying products there. They want to shop at that location. They want to go to those stores. So those shareholders are also your customers. Wouldn't you want them to be happy? And why would you knowingly ignore the plight that they're having with your shares, right? I can own your share, but I can't vote it, right? I should be receiving real dividends. I'm getting payments in lieu. Shouldn't you, if you take investor relations seriously, I think a company would be interested in that. I don't think it's proper to ignore it, because especially somewhere like GameStop, where all of those investors came in to sort of rush to the rescue, right? They didn't want to see the company go bankrupt. They didn't want to see the company, close down. And they knew that the company was under stress because of the pandemic. and all these physical locations were closed. So why wouldn't they want to help them and take care of them?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I mean, that's one of the things that has made this case different than a lot of previous examples of short selling, is that the company has very strong fundamentals, and unlike companies like Eagle Tech that ultimately went under, this has sort of had the strength to come back because people were invested in the company. You disagree?
Yeah, Eagle Tech, kind of like Eagle Tech had, what Eagle Tech had was an asset. They had a patent for a particular communication system, and that patent was very valuable. They had problems with death spiral financing and a lot of stuff going on. And you're right, they didn't have the financial strength to stand up against it. That's why, like, if you talk with Wes Christian, he'll tell you that it's a lot of small companies that are really getting hurt by this. But the reality is that the same thing happens to IBM and Apple and Microsoft and all of the others. It just, those bigger companies have a bigger capital base to pull from. They might have a line of credit with a bank, plus something here, plus they can go overseas to borrow money. I mean, they're not like the entrepreneur who's trying to launch his company is certainly more vulnerable. And so, like Eagle Stock, that turned into an asset grab where they wanted to run him out of business so they could take that asset, which was the patent, which in fact was taken from him. So, yeah, I think that it's important to remember that although, Eagle Tech, for example, Taser, or some of the others are very, splashy because of the damage done to the company, but every company has this problem. Bob Drummond, who was a reporter for Bloomberg Markets Magazine, in 2006, he did an article called "The Proxy Voting Charade," and he showed where the short interest was sufficient to that one of the strategies. So the strategy for short selling Eagle Tech is to drive the company into bankruptcy, and then whatever shares you sold, that money's just yours. You don't have to give it back to the buyers, right?
Tax free, right?
Grab the asset. Right. That I don't know. I'm not an accountant. I don't know if it's tax free or not. It is income. I think they have to recognize it as income at some point. I don't know how that part works. So you need a CPA on that. You need a chartered accountant. So that's a strategy for short selling Eagle Tech. The strategy for short selling Hewlett Packard, right, and Compaq was to get the votes. So when you borrow shares from a real owner, you get the vote, comes with that, right? With the borrowed share. And then you can lend that to someone else, and then they get a vote, and lend to someone, they get a vote, right? So what Bob looked at, and this is a brilliant approach, what he found, he looked at the short interest, and then he looked at the difference between the for and against votes on mergers. And he found that the short interest was greater than the margin, the for against margin, to approve the Hewlett Packard Compaq merger. Why is that interesting? Because the Hewlett family was against it. The Packard family was against it. They're big shareholders, you can imagine. The big institutional owners were against it. The pension funds who held their shares were against it, and yet it was approved. And so that's why you have to care about who's short selling your stock, who's borrowing it, who's naked shorting, who's failing to deliver, because that affects the votes, and that vote is an important part of corporate governance for the issuer.
Thanks for making it all the way to the end of the podcast. Don't forget our sponsor, ExpressVPN, and my book, Brexit, the Establishment Civil War, can both be found in the links in the description below. And also, please like, share, and subscribe to this podcast. It's the best way to help us grow. Until next time, thanks for listening.